Greetings everyone, this is Aaron Smith and welcome to my presentation on Jacob Kounin's, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Jacob Kounin's model of lesson management. So without further ado, let me get started. First of all, who was Jacob Kounin? I have a few quick facts for you to just get a little bit of an understanding of who he was and why he's important for our classroom instruction today. He began his career as an educational psychologist at Wayne State University in 1946. He published most of his educational theory in the 1970s, and in particular he had two very famous case studies that he drew upon to come up with all of his educational theories. He's considered the first researcher to systematically study the characteristics of effective classroom managers. So basically what he did in his case studies, and the thing that made his research incredibly helpful and practical for classroom teachers, was he looked at the best, the most effective classroom managers that he could find, the most effective classroom managers that were teachers, and then through watching what they did, he extrapolated certain characteristics and certain behaviors that these teachers exhibited that allowed them to be highly successful in managing their classrooms. And then he essentially published that work as his theory on lesson management. And his theories, as our textbook, Burden 2013 states, they deal with having a mental set for management. And what having a mental set for management means is having a mental set about managing student behavior. It deals with really understanding your surroundings, what is going on within your classroom, and understanding that special environment and everything that's going on, and realizing that you must consciously choose to behave in a certain way and manage your classroom in a certain way to be effective. His theory of lesson management deals with 5 main concepts, and I'm going to go over each one of these briefly, and then additionally, towards the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you a set of 6 rules based on Kounin's theories that you will be able to incorporate into your teaching that will help you become a more effective classroom manager. Okay, so his 5 main concepts are witness, overlapping, momentum, smoothness, and group focus. Witness, as defined by Burden on page 87, is a teacher's disposition or mental set to look at all parts of the classroom at all times, to be aware of what is happening, and then to demonstrate this witness to students by quickly and accurately intervening when there is inappropriate behavior. Okay, we have all had teachers at some point in time that seemed like they knew what we were doing before we even knew what we were doing. It's like they had eyes in the back of their head. They could be working with another group in the corner, and then we could be exhibiting some off-task behavior, and they could nail us for that and get us to immediately comply with the classroom rules and expectations. This is what witness is, and it's my favorite concept because I think it's just so important, and we experience it every day as teachers. There are so many things that we hear our students say, so many things that we see our students do, and we have to think and make the conscious decision and choices just little by little within the concept of our class. What are we going to do about what's going on? Are we going to act upon what we see? Is it big enough to disrupt the classroom and tell Johnny in the corner to stop doing what he is doing? Or is it something that can just go on, that it's not something that's disruptive of the class, that's just an individual behavior, and maybe it'll just go away on its own? We make tiny little decisions like that that have a tremendous influence on our classroom environment and our management every day. And I remember particularly when I was first starting out teaching English in Japan, my sense of witness was was good from the standpoint that I felt like I knew exactly what my kids were doing at all times. I knew if Ichiro was doing his homework for math instead of paying attention to my English class. I knew what was going on, but rather than letting some behaviors slide, I chose many times to disrupt the flow of instruction and disrupt the entire class to get certain students to do what I wanted them to do. When really I should have been better at trying to understand which behaviors were important for me to extinguish and take care of right then, and which behaviors should just be corrected after class so that I don't take away any of the instructional time. So with-itness is my favorite concept, and I think it's so important to exhibit with-itness as a teacher, to have those eyes in the back of your head and know everything that's going on in your classroom, and making conscious decisions about what things that are going on in the classroom to interact with and to acknowledge and to deal with. To exhibit with-itness, there are 4 things that you can do. You can monitor your classroom at all times, so you're constantly looking at your students, you're constantly walking around the classroom, seeing what everyone is doing, knowing what's going on. Okay. Next, respond quickly to inappropriate behaviors. Okay. And the reason you want to do this is because of what Kounin called the ripple effect, which means that if a student is exhibiting an inappropriate behavior and you see that inappropriate behavior and immediately correct that student, other students see that and then they follow through with stopping that inappropriate behavior, or they keep from even doing it to begin with. So it's very important to take care of those inappropriate behaviors quickly, because as we all know, little misbehaviors can escalate into behaviors that are very bad very quickly. Okay. 3, foresee potential problems. So you have to, especially in your lesson planning, think of things such as, well, if I put this person in a person with this group, then they're probably going to get into an argument, and that's going to cause a disruption. So I really need to change these groups for this activity and do this. You try to foresee what's going to happen during your lesson planning, and you try to understand what's going to happen in your classroom environment as well. And then finally, I threw this in. It's not necessarily a part of with-itness, but it's a part that's mentioned in our text. So I thought that I would add this to a part of with-itness, and that's just staying emotionally objective. So it's a part of that mental set. You are very objective. Even if you get angry or you're emotional about that, you don't ever show the students that. You maintain your professionalism, and even if a student may offend you in some way, you make sure that when you correct student behavior, that you're incredibly professional and dispassionate, and that you do what is right, and that when you correct a student or when you provide a student with a consequence, that you do that fairly, and that you maintain your calmness, your coolness, and you remain collected throughout your teaching, no matter what you're dealing with. The next aspect of Kounin's theory is overlapping, and overlapping is very closely connected with itness. It has to do with the ability of a teacher to supervise or handle more than one group or activity at a time. So, for example, you could be working with a group on one side of the classroom and helping them with something that they're engaged in the group work that you have presented them with, and yet you can see that the group across the room from them, that many of the members are on their cell phones and they're off task, and then you can correct that, recognize that, and correct that behavior while you're still helping other people. This is something that I think is very difficult and challenging to do, but it's also very important to do. Momentum. This is another aspect of Kounin's lesson management, and that deals with the pacing of the lesson. The key is to avoid downtime. So when you're planning your lessons, you want to make sure that you plan appropriate times for activities, and you want to make sure that you avoid just free time or anything like that, because students have a tendency when they're bored to misbehave. So you want to make sure that you have planned your lesson accordingly so that everyone is working and on task throughout the course of an entire lesson. And your lesson planning is going to reflect that. So this comes back to a big part of classroom management, which is effective classroom management starts with your instruction. You have to provide instruction that's stimulating to the students and doesn't give them free time, that engages them, and that they really have to focus on and work with so that they avoid misbehaviors. Next is smoothness, and this is something that I struggle with a great deal, and it refers to the ability to stay on task throughout a lesson, avoiding what Burden calls abrupt changes, digressions, or divergencies. This has to do with all of the anecdotes that we tell our students. We need to limit those as much as possible. And when I read about this, this really struck a chord with me because I know that oftentimes I tell anecdotes or stories about my experience in Japan, especially with my ESL students, because I try to relate to them in the fact that, you know, I've lived in a foreign country before and I speak a second language and I'm bilingual and all of those things that I relate to them with. And I really need to limit that. I have to maintain my professionalism and I have to manage the lesson and realize that I have to stay smooth and true to the lesson, so that students remain focused and on task, and so that I remain focused and on task and my instruction doesn't suffer. Next is group focus. And this occurs when the teacher makes a conscious effort to keep the attention of all students at all times. Okay, if you are in the middle of a classroom and you are attempting to get everyone's attention and maintain their focus on what you're doing, then you are working on maintaining your group focus for your classroom. Okay, and 3 ways that you can maintain a group focus are use group alerting. So talk to the whole class, you know, tell them what they're doing, tell them when they need help, tell them things that are going on, and that you're taking actions to engage the attention of everyone that's in your classroom. Next, you need to maintain group accountability. So students need to know that their work matters, that even if you're not going to grade it, that it's being recorded in some way, and that their work's valuable and that it means something. That's basically what they need to know. They need to know that they're going to be held accountable for what they're doing, because if they know they're held accountable, then they're more likely to do the work. And then use high participation formats. And this means that even if you're providing an activity where not everyone has to answer or talk, all students are performing in some way throughout the course of that lesson. You need activities that involve and integrate all of your students in the classroom, whether they have to talk in front of the whole class and do a presentation, or they're just taking notes or writing down their thoughts or opinions for the day in a journal or something of that nature. You just need to make sure that you're using high participation formats and everything. Next, this is a 6-step process, and I've kind of meshed this together with everything that's said in our book and some other resources that I've seen. And these are basically 6 ways for you to use Kounin's concepts to prevent misbehavior in your classroom, because all of his keys are tied together, even though they may deal with misbehavior or with how you teach your lesson or how you engage the entire classroom. They really all deal with kind of creating that great learning environment. So you could either refer to this really as ways to prevent misbehavior or just ways to manage your classroom and your lessons. So number 1, exhibit with itness. Okay, and we already know what that is. You're going to want to make sure that you monitor your room, you know exactly what's going on, and that you consciously choose and make decisions about which behavior that you're going to address and which behavior you're just going to let go away on its own, and then how you're going to deal with students that are misbehaving. Next, you're going to use overlapping, where you basically are a great multitasker and you are able to work with one student while you are telling another student to cease and desist. which leads us to number 3, use desist. So when a student is off task, ask that student to stop that behavior or tell that student to stop that behavior. And typically what I do, I use desist in my classroom a lot, but typically once I have a relationship with students, especially this time of the year like January, I found that it's more effective to use phrases like, for example, if a student is up out of his or her seat without permission, if I say, I really dislike it when you get out of your seat. Can you get back to your seat? I really dislike it because it really takes my concentration off the whole class and off trying to teach the lesson. And I don't like it when you do that. So could you please sit down? So I try to show, how that type of behavior would hurt my feelings, and then let students know about that. And that's fairly effective if you have a good rapport with your students. It's fairly effective in getting them to limit their misbehaviors or to desist from misbehavior. Next, avoid satiation. And this takes a lot of practice, and I'm still working on this. Satiation is when you've given students too much time to do an activity and they're finished with it, and then they have this free time and it just leads to a bunch of off-task behaviors. So you really have to calibrate your instruction effectively, and that just takes really getting to know your students in your class and what they're capable of doing and the difficulty of what you're asking them to do. So you really want to make sure that there's no free time essentially in your class throughout your instruction. And I think the best thing to do with this is to really just over plan. Make sure that you're planning more than enough, and that your students, that if anything, you have to finish an activity the next day rather than having 10 or 15 minutes of free time left at the end of the period. Next, maintain momentum and smoothness. So just that flow of activities within your lesson. Keep moving from one thing to the next, and then limit those distractions to your instruction as much as possible. And avoid changing things. We've all had a really bad activity probably that we planned that didn't go the way that we wanted. Don't do a ridiculously abrupt change in the middle of that. Try to modify it, because it just doesn't work too well if you just throw everything out. If you're having a bad experience with the lesson, try to be smooth and avoid abrupt changes. And then lastly, maintain a group focus. Just make sure that you're trying to reach all of your students and keep all of your students engaged. Okay. So now that we have looked at Kounin's work, his philosophy, and his theories, I would like you to take a look at, you may want to pause this now so that you can put this in your browser, and I'll actually put the link to this in the YouTube video. But this is a 10-question quiz. Okay, it's very simple over some of the terms and things that we looked at, and it's on the website Kahoot. So if you would just go there, it's very quick. It's all multiple choice. You can go to that exit slip and you can check that out. Okay, and then I can share the results with you all if you would like it at a later time. And then lastly, I would like you to go to today's meet and answer these following questions. And again, I'll provide that link in the YouTube video once you get the link for that. So go to today's meet and this chat room right here, and then I'd like you to respond to the following questions. Number 1, which concept created by Kounin do you find the most interesting and why? And 2, how can you use Kounin's work to become a more effective classroom manager? So today's meet is a lot like Twitter. You can't respond with a huge long response, but that's good. It can be really rapid fire, and if we really utilize this, then we can talk about Kounin's work and hopefully find some practical ways for that to influence our instruction for the better. So thank you all so much for listening to me. Here are my references if you want to take a look at that. I primarily used our textbook, but I did use Wikipedia somewhat. I know that some people may cringe when they hear that, but our book has a pretty good array of knowledge of Kounin's work on pages 87 through 91 if you want to check that out further. And you can just Google Jacob Kounin, and he's just all over the internet because he's such a um, popular educational theorist for everything that he's done. So, thank you so much for staying the course and listening to my presentation. I hope that it was meaningful and worthwhile to you, and that in the end that it will help you be a better classroom manager. Thank you.